Hey friends, today we're going to be making 3 different wholesome nourish bowls. I feel like these bowls can go by so many different names. There's like macro bowls and Buddha bowls. I like to call them nourish bowls, and we make them pretty often just because it's such an easy way to use up any leftovers that we've got in the fridge. But if you feel like we're using a veggie, plant protein, or grain that you don't have at home, just substitute it for whatever you do have. Seriously, these are so flexible, these recipes, it's really hard to go wrong with any of them. But yeah, let's just dive right in. For the first recipe, we're going to be making a golden tempeh nourish bowl with some seasoned red rice and a portobello kale sauté. So we are going to be using tempeh for this recipe, but if you don't have tempeh, you can use tofu as well. And we're going to cut this into about 1 centimeter by 2 centimeter thick cubes. And then to enhance its flavor a little bit, we're going to want to marinate it. So to a shallow bowl, we're going to add in 1.5 cups of orange juice. We'll also add in a 1/4 cup of tahini, which is a sesame seed paste, 4 cloves of crushed garlic, 1 tablespoon of miso paste, as well as a tablespoon of sambal ulek, or any other hot sauce that you've got, 2 teaspoons of freshly grated ginger, and finally 2 teaspoons of turmeric powder. So now we're just gonna mash it and whisk it until it's all well combined. And then when it is, we can transfer the tempeh to the bowl, toss everything to coat, and then you wanna let it sit and marinate for as long as possible. Even if it's just for a few minutes, that's already good. But ideally 2 hours or overnight in the fridge would be best. So for the grain in this recipe, I'm gonna be using some red rice, which is a whole grain rice. And from a health perspective, that's great because it means that it's really high in fiber, but it also means that it takes a little bit longer than like white rice, for example, to cook. So what I usually like to do is I like to soak it the night before. That way the next day it cooks in about half the time, and our bodies can actually increase the absorption of the nutrients a little bit better once it's been soaked. But if you don't have red rice, you can just use brown rice or quinoa, white rice, whatever you've got is fine. So after having soaked about 1.5 cups of dry red rice overnight, we're gonna drain it, and then we're gonna add it to a medium pot on high heat, along with 1/2 cup of water. And for some extra flavor, I'm gonna add in 1 crumbled mushroom bouillon cube. In our nourish bowls, I usually like to flavor the rice, and I think that the mushroom bouillon cube does that really, really well. But if you don't have it, you could also just cook your rice in some vegetable broth instead, and that'll also work really well. Then we're gonna bring the rice to a boil, reduce it to a simmer, and partially cover it with a lid and let it cook until the rice is tender and all the liquid has been absorbed, which will take about 20 minutes. So while the rice is cooking, we're gonna separate the marinated tempeh from the sauce, and we're gonna put it in a separate bowl. And then as for the sauce that the tempeh was marinating in, this is actually going to be the dressing for our nourish bowl, so reserve this and set it aside for now. Then going back to the tempeh, we're gonna sprinkle about 2 tablespoons of cornstarch over top of it, or you could use arrowroot powder, and then we're gonna toss this to coat. To a large pan on medium-high heat, we're gonna add in a tablespoon of vegetable oil, and when it's hot, we're gonna gently add in the tempeh. We're gonna then pan fry this until the tempeh is golden on all sides, giving it a flip every few minutes. So while that's cooking away, I'm going to prepare the veggies. For our nourish bowl, we've got 2 portobello mushrooms. You can use whatever mushrooms you've got though. Cremini mushrooms work great for this too. And I'm gonna personally remove the stem off of ours because it's a little bit more kind of thick and woody than usual, and I'll save it for a broth. What some people also do is they remove what they call gills, which is this accordion looking brown part on the inside of the mushroom. You can just scoop it out with a spoon. The reason sometimes people remove it is just because it adds this like muddiness and a brown texture throughout your veggies. Some people don't like that. Personally, I don't mind it, so I'm gonna leave it in. Now I'm gonna thinly slice the mushrooms, and we're also gonna thinly slice about 2 medium-sized carrots. You can cut it into either coins or half moons like I'm doing here. When the tempeh is golden and finished cooking, we're gonna set it aside in a separate dish, and then to the same pan, we're gonna add in 2 teaspoons of sesame oil and the mushrooms. We're gonna cook this for about 3 to 4 minutes, or until the mushrooms start to get a little bit golden and start to release their moisture. And then we can add in the carrots along with 4 cups of cut up kale and a little sprinkle of salt and some pepper. Cook this for about another 4 minutes, or until the kale is bright green and slightly wilted. And we want the carrots to be tender but still a little bit crunchy. And when it's done, we can transfer it to its own dish. And pretty much all that's left at this point is to assemble our nourish bowl. So on the bottom, I'm gonna pile on some of the seasoned red rice. I'm gonna top it with a generous heap of the sauteed kale mix, and then add on the pan-fried marinated tempeh here as well. Then feel free to top it with any other veggies that need using up. We're using some bell pepper here, topping it as well with some roasted cashews, green onions, and a sprinkle of sesame seeds. And finally, we can pour the golden tahini sauce on top. and now you're ready to devour it. It's a nutrient-dense, wholesome, and nourishing meal. This is what I love about Nourish bowls. It's really easy to visualize that plate method. So half of our plate, or bowl in this case, is veggies. Another quarter of it is plant-based proteins, and the last quarter of it is some grains, whole grains in this case. And this is a visual tool that you can use anytime you're constructing a Nourish bowl. It doesn't have to be this recipe in particular. And in case you're interested in learning more, we've written a whole blog post on following the plate method, and we've made a video about it. I'll link it here and in the description box below in case you also want to get this downloadable free PDF that we made on following the plate method. Maybe you'll find it helpful. For the next recipe, we're going to be making this soba noodle Nourish bowl with 2 types of plant proteins. So first we're going to start off with the soba noodles, which are really easy to make. We're just going to use about 9 ounces or 270 grams worth. We're going to add it to a pot of boiling water and cook it until it's kind of al dente, which is going to take about 4 minutes. And then we can drain it and rinse it under cold water just to get rid of any of the starch that's on it. And once it's nice and drained, we're going to transfer it to a bowl. I'm going to drizzle on about a teaspoon of sesame oil just to prevent the noodles from sticking together, but it also adds a really nice sesame flavor. But we'll set this aside for now. And then we're gonna thaw out a 1.5 cups of frozen edamame by pouring some boiling water over top of it and letting it sit while we move on to preparing the tofu. Here I'm using a 450 gram block of firm tofu. I'm gonna squeeze it with my hands just to get rid of any extra liquid that's in it. And then we can cut these into about 1 centimeter cubes. Then we can transfer this to a bowl, and I'm also gonna add about 2.5 tablespoons of cornstarch to this. I'm just adding cornstarch here because it kind of gives the tofu a nice little crispy coating, but you could also use arrowroot powder or just leave it out altogether. We're also gonna add in 1/2 teaspoon of salt and pepper and then mix this together. Then to a large frying pan on high heat, we're gonna add about 1 tablespoon of vegetable oil and place the tofu in a single layer on the heated pan and pan fry this until it's golden on all sides, which might take about 10 to 15 minutes. While the tofu is frying, we're gonna prepare the veggies. So for this, I've got a head of bok choy. I'm gonna cut the leaves and the stems into bite-sized pieces, and we're gonna keep those green leaves and the white stems separated for now. We're also gonna trim the ends off of about 2 big handfuls of green beans and then cut these into thirds. And then finally, I'm gonna use 2 roasted red bell peppers that I'm getting from a jar here that I'm then gonna thinly slice. These roasted bell peppers add a really nice flavor to the Nourish bowl. And once the tofu is completely cooked, I'm gonna add in a tablespoon of black bean garlic sauce and toss it to coat. This black bean sauce is one of my new favorite condiments. It's such a quick and delicious way to add a load of flavor to any dish. So once the tofu is all coated, we can transfer it to its own dish. And then returning the pan to the heat on high, we're gonna add in the bok choy stems, green beans, and just a tiny splash of water. We're gonna let this cook until it's softened but still crunchy, which is gonna take about 3 minutes. And then we can add in the bok choy leaves and another 2 tablespoons of the black bean garlic sauce, sauteing this until the bok choy leaves are wilted. Then we can transfer this to its own bowl. By now the edamame should also be thawed enough, so we're just gonna drain the water from that. And then the last step is to just make the sauce, which is just 3 super simple ingredients. So we're gonna need 3 tablespoons of rice vinegar, 1 tablespoon of sodium reduced soy sauce, and 1/2 tablespoon of sesame oil. Mix it together, and that's it. Now it's time to assemble our bowls. So first in, we're gonna load our bowls up with some of the cooled soba noodles. We're gonna top it with some of that crisped tofu, and then the green beans and bok choy veggies, followed by some edamame and the sliced roasted red bell pepper. And then we're gonna top it with some fresh red chili slices, some green onions, and roasted sesame seeds. And finally, we can drizzle over top our sauce. Personally, I'm a really huge fan of vinegary dressings, but I know that Robin, for example, isn't. So if you do want to mellow out the amount of vinegar in it, just add a little bit less and increase the amount of soy sauce and sesame oil. But that's it. Nourish bowl number 2 is ready for the eating. For the final recipe, we're making this coconut rice and roasted lentil Nourish bowl. Again, I've got 1.5 cups of dry brown rice that I first rinsed and soaked overnight that I'm now going to drain. And then we're gonna add this to a medium pot on high heat, along with 400 milliliters of light coconut milk that just come from a can. We're also gonna add in an optional 6 cardamom pods that I'm first gonna crack open a little bit just to expose the seeds. And finally, I'm gonna add in 1 vegetable bouillon cube that I'm just gonna crush in there with my hands to make sure it dissolves evenly. Then give this all a stir, let it come to a boil, and then reduce the heat to low and let it cook uncovered until the rice is tender and all the liquid has been absorbed, which might take about 10 to 15 minutes. Then we can remove the rice from the heat and fluff it with a fork just to reveal the cardamom pods, which we do want to remove, don't want to eat those. And then we're going to let this sit covered until we're ready to serve it. While the rice is cooking, we're gonna roast some veggies. So for this, we're gonna need a head of broccoli that I'm gonna cut into bite-sized pieces. There's also 1 red onion we're gonna need that we're gonna coarsely chop, and 2 parsnips that we're gonna peel and cut into about 1 centimeter by 2 centimeter sticks. Parsnips are a great little root vegetable. I honestly don't use it often enough, I think, but it's in the same family as carrots. So if you don't have any parsnips, you can use carrots instead, or maybe zucchini. Honestly, whatever you have will work perfectly well here. Now, once we've added all of these veggies to a baking dish, we're gonna drain and rinse a can of cooked lentils. I've got brown lentils here. And then we're gonna add this to a baking dish as well. And then we're gonna drizzle on top, divided over both the trays, about a tablespoon of olive oil and a heaping teaspoon each of ground cumin, garlic powder, onion powder, and about half a teaspoon of salt, a sprinkle of cayenne, and some freshly cracked black pepper. And then we're gonna toss everything to coat. Now, if you want, you can mix the lentils right in there with the veggies, but I just wanted to keep them separate for presentation purposes later. And now we can pop these veggies and lentils into the oven at 400 Fahrenheit or 200 Celsius for about 10 minutes. We're gonna stop to give it a stir and then return it to the oven for another 10 minutes. But while that bakes, we're going to whip together a really quick sambal tahini mayo. This is one of my go-to dressings for salad and nourish bowls because it's really easy. So to a jar or bowl, we're gonna add in 1/3 cup of tahini, 1/4 cup of water, a tablespoon of sambal ulek or any other hot sauce you've got, the juice from about half of a lime, 2 teaspoons of sodium reduced soy sauce, 2 teaspoons of agave syrup, and half a teaspoon of onion powder. And then we're gonna give this a stir until we're left with a smooth sauce. And finally, it is time to assemble our bowls. So on the bottom, we're gonna add our coconut flavored rice. We're gonna top it with a generous heap of the roasted lentils and the veggies. And then you can add whatever fresh veggies you've got here too. Like I've got some peeled carrots and radishes that need using up, but you can top it with whatever you've got. I'm also adding on some roasted almonds, which I think gives it a really nice crunch. And then comes the best part as always, which is drizzling on that tahini sambal sauce over top. The coconut milk in the rice and the tahini in the sauce makes this a really creamy, nourish bowl that's just really hearty, filling, and packed full of flavor. But yeah, I think that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed these recipes and hopefully got some new ideas of like combinations and things you can try with your nourish bowls. If you're looking for the full breakdown to any of the recipes, as always, we've got that on our blog, so I'll leave that link for you in the description box below. And thanks a lot for watching. Pick Up Limes signing off. We'll see you in the next video. Yes!
You did it out of frame.
So in our nourish tahini sauces is kind of one of my go-to sauces for nourish bowls. It's really easy. So rude. Sorry for so loud.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah? 3, 2. Damn it.